Sometimes I wondered if I had adopted written on my forehead like some invisible label only I could feel. On paper, my life was good. I had a stable job at an office downtown. Nothing exciting, but it paid the bills. And my adoptive family? They were kind. Mason and Claire, my siblings, had always been supportive in their way, but they were closer to each other than they were to me. I didn't blame them. They shared memories and milestones I wasn't a part of. It wasn't anyone's fault, really. That night, we sat around the dinner table. The house warm with the smell of Claire's lasagna. Everyone was laughing about some childhood mishap, how Mason had broken Claire's bike trying to pop a wheelie. They were imitating each other's voices, the table shaking from their laughter. I smiled, but it felt hollow. I wasn't part of that story. My childhood memories didn't overlap with theirs. Sure, they tried to include me, but moments like this reminded me of what I wasn't. Lydia, remember when you tried to bake brownies and set the oven on fire? Claire teased, trying to pull me into the conversation. I laughed awkwardly. Yeah, good times. Except it wasn't. That had been one of the first times I tried to do something special for the family after moving in. I was 12 and desperate to impress them. Instead, I ended up with burnt brownies and a kitchen full of smoke. As the conversation shifted back to their shared memories, I excused myself to the kitchen under the pretense of needing more water. My chest felt heavy, the way it always did after these dinners. That's when I saw it again. The letter. It sat on the side table by the fridge, where I'd left it weeks ago. The return address glared at me accusingly. Karen and Thomas Davis. My biological parents. I hadn't opened it yet. Honestly, I wasn't sure why I'd even kept it. Part of me wanted to shred it and forget they'd reached out. But another part, the part that always felt like an outsider, wondered if I should. Maybe knowing where I came from would help me feel less like a stranger everywhere I went. Lydia, you okay in there? Mason called from the table. Yeah, just grabbing water. I called back, forcing cheer into my voice. I grabbed the pitcher and returned to the table, leaving the letter untouched again. My smile stayed plastered for the rest of dinner, but my mind kept wandering back to the envelope. Did my real family even want me? Or was I just being foolish? The idea lingered long after I went to bed that night, the unopened letter sitting like a weight in the corner of my mind. It was a Saturday morning when I finally decided to call them. I'd stared at their letter so many times I could recite the words by heart. They'd apologize for giving me up and ask for a chance to reconnect. It sounded so heartfelt, so real. A part of me ached to know the people who brought me into the world. When Karen answered the phone, her voice was soft, almost trembling. Lydia? Oh, sweetheart. It's so good to hear your voice. Before I knew it, I was driving to a little cafe they'd chosen for our first meeting. My stomach churned the entire way there. What if they didn't like me? Or worse, what if I didn't like them? The cafe was cozy with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh coffee. I spotted them immediately. Karen and Thomas sat at a corner table, their hands intertwined, scanning the room nervously. Karen stood up as I approached, her face lighting up. Yes, hi, my voice wavered, but she pulled me into a tight hug before I could say more. Oh, look at you, she said, pulling back and cupping my face. You're beautiful. Just like your grandmother. Thomas joined us, his smile warm but tentative. We've been waiting for this day for so long. As we sat down, I couldn't help but notice how much Karen's eyes resembled mine. It felt surreal, like looking into a mirror with just a hint of distortion. They began telling me their story. How they were too young and struggling when they had me. How they thought giving me up would give me a better life. Karen dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, and Thomas reached over to squeeze her hand. It broke our hearts, Karen said, her voice cracking. Not a day went by that we didn't think about you. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe them, to lean into their version of love and loss. But another part, quieter but persistent, whispered that their story felt a little too polished. Karen's expression softened as she brought up my late grandparents. Your grandmother would have adored you, Lydia. She always wanted us to find you. She even included you in her will. Thomas chuckled lightly. Not that it was much. They weren't exactly rolling in money. I nodded, unsure how to respond. The mention of the will felt oddly placed. But their warmth and sincerity overshadowed the nagging feeling in my gut. As the conversation continued, Karen and Thomas painted a picture of a family desperate for redemption. They shared stories of hardship, making me feel guilty for ever doubting them. By the time we finished lunch, Karen was holding my hand across the table, tears brimming in her eyes. We just want to make things right, Lydia. We've missed so much. I left the cafe with a strange mix of emotions, hope, guilt, and an unsettling uncertainty I couldn't quite shake. Karen and Thomas started inviting me to dinners, calling me their little miracle, and filling the air with promises of a future together. And slowly, without realizing it, I found myself spending less time with Mason and Claire. This was what unconditional love felt like, wasn't it? At least that's what I told myself. But deep down, a sliver of doubt lingered, growing sharper with every smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. I was starting to believe I'd finally found my place with Karen and Thomas. They called me every day, asked about my life, and invited me over for dinners that felt warm and full of laughter. It was everything I thought I'd been missing. One evening, as we sat in their modest living room, Karen brought up the inheritance. "Lydia, sweetheart, we've been meaning to talk to you about something important," she said, her voice delicate, as if she were handling glass. Thomas nodded, his tone just as gentle. "Your grandparents' estate. It's a bit complicated. There are taxes and legal fees we didn't anticipate. We just want to make sure everything is handled properly, so you don't lose anything." Karen reached for my hand. "We'd be happy to help manage it for you. We've dealt with this kind of thing before." I hesitated. Money wasn't something I'd ever had to think much about. I knew the inheritance existed, but I hadn't touched it. Still, they sounded so sincere. And they were my parents, after all. "You trust us, don't you?" Karen's eyes brimmed with that same warmth that had drawn me in from the start. "Of course," I said, feeling a pang of guilt for even hesitating. A week later, I found myself in a lawyer's office, signing papers I barely understood. "This is just to give us legal access to handle the estate," Thomas had assured me. "You'll still have full control once everything's settled." But something about it felt off. I brushed it aside, reminding myself that they only wanted to help. As I spent more time with Karen and Thomas, I saw less of Mason, Claire, and my adoptive parents. I could feel the distance growing, but I didn't know how to bridge it. Every time they called, I felt defensive, like they were trying to pull me back into a life where I'd always been second best. One evening, my adoptive mom cornered me in the kitchen during a family dinner. "Lydia, what's going on? You've barely been home. And when you are, it's like you're somewhere else." "I'm fine," I said, avoiding her gaze. "Fine? You're cutting us out of your life for people you barely know," Dad interjected from the doorway. I turned to him, anger bubbling up. "You mean my real family? Maybe I'm finally getting the love and support I've been missing here." Mason's face fell. "That's not fair, Lydia. We've always loved you." Claire, standing beside him, added quietly, "You're pushing us away for people who abandoned you." I didn't know how to respond. Their words stung. But so did the years of feeling like an outsider. "You don't understand," I muttered, grabbing my coat and leaving. A few weeks later, I overheard Karen and Thomas talking in hushed voices as I walked past their bedroom. "She signed everything over," Karen said, her tone triumphant. "Good. Once we sell off the estate, we'll be set for life," Thomas replied. "What about Lydia?" Karen asked, almost laughing. "She'll have nothing left. She's too naive to realize what's happening." My stomach dropped. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. The warmth and love I thought I'd found were nothing but a lie. I confronted them the next morning, trembling with anger. "You used me," I said, holding back tears. "You lied about everything." Karen didn't even flinch. "You're overreacting. We're your parents. We deserve a little for everything we've been through." Thomas shrugged. "You're an adult, Lydia. You should have read the fine print." I packed my things and left. But I had nowhere to go. My adoptive family wasn't an option. Not after the way I treated them. That night, as rain poured down, I drove aimlessly, my vision blurred by tears. I didn't see the truck until it was too late. The last thing I felt was regret, the weight of all my choices crashing down on me. I'd lost everything. My family. My inheritance. And myself. I opened my eyes to the soft glow of morning light filtering through the pale curtains of my childhood bedroom. For a moment I felt disoriented. The familiar scent of lavender from the sachet my mom always tucked into my drawers tickled my senses. How? How was I here? I sat up slowly, clutching my blanket, my heart pounding. The last thing I remembered was the blinding headlights and the deafening crash. My hands trembled as I looked around, taking in every detail of the room that had once felt more like a borrowed space than my own. The bulletin board was pinned with faded photos of Mason, Claire, and me from summer vacations. My art supplies were still neatly organized on the desk, untouched. My laptop sat open, showing the date. I gasped. 20 years old. This was the year I reached out to Karen and Thomas. The year I tore my adoptive family apart, chasing a mirage of love and belonging. My breath hitched as memories of my first life crashed over me. Karen's betrayal, Thomas's callous shrug, the ache of Mason's words, and the icy loneliness in that car before the crash. I pressed my hands to my face, overwhelmed. But then, like the stillness after a storm, a thought settled over me. I'm alive. I looked at my hands, my legs, even touched my face. It was real. I was here. Somehow I'd been given a second chance. The letter. My chest tightened as I spotted the envelope peeking out from under a stack of papers on my desk. Karen's handwriting stared back at me. The invitation to chaos. I tore the letter open with trembling hands, my eyes scanning the words that once filled me with hope and longing. Dearest Lydia, we've thought of you every day since the moment we gave you up. I crumpled it in my fist. No, not this time. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I looked so much younger, almost innocent. But I knew better now. Karen and Thomas weren't saviors, and their love wasn't unconditional. It was time to stop searching for validation from people who didn't deserve my trust. I thought about Mason's concerned face that night, the way Claire tried to pull me back before I pushed them away. They were my family, even if I hadn't always felt it. They deserved better from me. I won't make the same mistakes, I whispered to myself, clenching my fists. At breakfast, my mom set a plate of eggs and toast in front of me, smiling. You've been quiet this morning, Lydia. Everything okay? I looked up at her, really seeing her for the first time. The woman who raised me, cared for me, and loved me even when I doubted it. For the first time in years, I smiled back, a genuine one. Yeah, Mom. Everything's going to be okay. It started with small things, like showing up for Mason's soccer practice or helping Claire with one of her art projects. It was funny how much I'd missed these moments before. Too caught up in my own insecurities to see the love in the little things. This time I wasn't going to take any of it for granted. One evening we were sitting around the dining table, playing a game of charades. Mason was acting out something ridiculously absurd. A giraffe running from a spaceship, and Claire and I were doubled over in laughter. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so light. After the game, I lingered in the living room while Mason put away the board and Claire started sketching on the couch. I cleared my throat, my voice tentative. I wanted to say I'm sorry for before. Claire looked up from her sketchbook, her brow furrowed. Sorry for what? For pulling away. For acting like I wasn't part of this family. I know it must have hurt, and I never meant to make you feel like I didn't appreciate you both. Mason plopped down on the arm of the couch. You're being too hard on yourself, Lyd. We've always known you were different. I winced, but he smiled gently. Not in a bad way, he added quickly. You've always been searching for something, and I get that. But just so you know, you don't have to search. You've always had us. That night, as I lay in bed, Mason's words replayed in my mind. But guilt gnawed at me. No matter how much they reassured me, I still felt like I was borrowing this life, like an imposter pretending to fit into a puzzle that wasn't quite my shape. The memories of my first life were vivid and unforgiving. The things I said, the bridges I burned. It was hard to shake the thought that I didn't deserve their forgiveness. The next morning I found Claire in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up and raised an eyebrow. You've got that. I'm overthinking everything, look again. Doi. I forced a laugh but slumped into the chair across from her. You do. She slid a cup of coffee toward me. Spill. I hesitated, fiddling with the edge of my sleeve. Do you ever feel like I don't belong here? Like I'm an outsider? Claire's face softened, and she reached across the table to take my hand. Lydia, you're not an outsider. You've always been one of us. Even if you don't see it, we do. So stop doubting it, okay? Later that day, I saw the letter from Karen and Thomas sitting on my desk. My first instinct was to rip it open and let the longing consume me. But the memory of their betrayal in my first life burned in my mind. Not this time. Instead of responding, I opened my laptop and started researching. I found news articles about Thomas's business, shady dealings, lawsuits, and bankruptcy rumors. Karen's social media painted a picture of a woman desperate to climb back into a lifestyle she couldn't afford. I sat back, my heart racing. The pieces were already falling into place. But this time I wasn't going to be their pawn. Not again, I whispered to myself. This time I would be ready. I agreed to meet Karen and Thomas at a small cafe in town. A public place where I could easily keep my emotions in check. I wasn't the same naive person they met the first time, and I wasn't about to let them pull me into their web again. Karen spotted me first, waving dramatically from a corner booth. She was all smiles, her hair styled to perfection. Thomas sat beside her with a practiced air of warmth. There she is, Karen exclaimed, standing to hug me. I stiffened but allowed it, noting the over-the-top enthusiasm. We've waited so long for this moment, she said, pulling back to study my face, her eyes glistening with what could have been real tears, or just a well-rehearsed act. Thomas shook my hand firmly. You look just like your grandmother. She'd be so proud to see you now. I forced a polite smile and sat down. Thanks. I'm glad we could meet. Karen launched into a long-winded story about how hard it had been to give me up. We wanted to keep you so badly, Lydia. But we just couldn't make it work back then. Not a day has gone by that we haven't thought of you. In my first life, I would have melted under the weight of her words. Desperate to belong. This time I nodded politely, letting her talk while I observed their body language. Karen's overly eager smiles, Thomas's calculated charm. It all felt like a performance. When the conversation turned to my late grandparents, I caught the subtle shift in their tone. Your grandmother left quite an estate, you know, Thomas said casually. It's a shame we weren't around to guide you through all the legal complexities. Handling something like that can be overwhelming. Karen chimed in. We'd be happy to help now, though. We just want to make things easier for you. I sipped my coffee slowly, hiding the anger rising in my chest. That's kind of you, but I've got things under control. Later that evening, I recounted the meeting to Mason while we sat at the kitchen table. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression darkening with every detail. They're after your inheritance, he said bluntly. I nodded. Yeah, I figured. Mason leaned forward. Then let's stop them before they can do any damage. You're not alone in this, Lyd. His support gave me the courage to dig deeper. Together, we started researching Karen and Thomas's history. It didn't take long to uncover red flags. Lawsuits, unpaid debts, and rumors of shady business deals. Their financial troubles were worse than I'd realized. In my first life, I consulted a lawyer in secret, presenting my findings and outlining my concerns about their intentions. I want to make sure they can't touch the inheritance, I told her. I need to protect what's left of my grandparents' legacy. The lawyer nodded. We can take steps to secure your assets and ensure you have full control. But you'll need to be prepared for them to push back. I was ready this time. A week later, Karen and Thomas invited me to their home. It was smaller and less glamorous than I expected, with signs of neglect in the peeling paint and overgrown yard. Inside, the furniture was mismatched, and the air carried a faint mustiness. Karen poured tea and gestured for me to sit. It's so wonderful to finally have you here, she said, placing a hand on mine. I smiled thinly, keeping my guard up. It's nice to visit. I've been busy with work, but I wanted to make time. Thomas cleared his throat. Speaking of work, have you thought more about letting us help with the estate? We've been through these things before. And it's easy to make mistakes without guidance. Karen chimed in. It's what your grandparents would have wanted, for us to take care of you. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. That's interesting because my lawyer said the estate is pretty straightforward. Everything is already in my name. Karen's smile faltered. A lawyer? Oh, sweetheart, there's no need for that. Family should trust family. I leaned back, keeping my tone calm. Exactly. Which is why I think it's best to handle things transparently. Don't you agree? The room grew tense, the warmth in their smiles replaced with something colder. For the first time, I saw through them completely. They weren't my family. They were opportunists. That night, I returned home to Mason and Claire, feeling a mix of relief and resolve. I'm cutting them off, I told them firmly. They're not my family. You are. Claire hugged me tightly and Mason gave me a proud nod. You've got us, Lyd, he said. Always. This time I wasn't going to let anyone take advantage of me. Karen's call came out of the blue. Lydia, sweetheart. Her voice oozed warmth. We need to meet. There's an important document we'd like you to review. My heart sank. I could already guess where this was headed. When I arrived at their small home, Karen greeted me with a hug that felt a little too tight. Thomas was waiting at the dining table with a stack of papers in front of him. We've been thinking about how we can better support you, Karen began, pulling me toward a chair. You've got so much on your plate, and we just want to help take some of the burden off. Thomas slid the papers across the table. This document would give us limited access to the estate funds, just enough to manage some of the bigger responsibilities. My stomach churned. Their intentions were as clear as day. What kind of responsibilities? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Karen leaned forward, her expression earnest. Oh, things like property maintenance and taxes. You don't need to worry about the specifics. Thomas chimed in. It's what your grandparents would have wanted. They trusted us to guide you. I forced a smile, glancing at the papers. The legal jargon was overwhelming, but one thing stood out. Granting them this access would mean relinquishing my control over the estate. Let me take these home to review, I said, sliding the papers back toward myself. Karen's face twitched, but she quickly recovered. Of course, darling. Take all the time you need. Thomas didn't hide his impatience as well. Just don't wait too long. These things are time-sensitive. That night, I spread the documents across my dining table, my hands trembling. Every fiber of my being screamed not to sign. But doubt crept in. Was I overreacting? Was I really going to cut ties with my biological parents again? Mason found me staring at the papers, my head in my hands. What's going on? He asked, pulling up a chair. Beside me, they want me to give them access to the estate, I said quietly. And part of me feels like if I say no, I'm turning my back on them. What if I'm being too harsh? Mason's expression hardened. Lydia, they're manipulating you. This isn't about family. It's about control. You don't owe them anything. But what if I'm wrong? I whispered. What if I'm pushing away the only chance I have to know where I come from? He placed a reassuring hand on mine. You come from us. Claire and I are your family no matter what. And the Lydia I know is smart enough to see through their lies. His words were like a lifeline, pulling me back to reality. The next day, I returned to Karen and Thomas's house. They greeted me with the same overbearing warmth, but I could see the anticipation in their eyes. Did you have a chance to look over the documents? Karen asked, her voice honeyed but tight. I set the papers on the table and met their gaze. I did. And I'm not signing them. Karen's smile froze. Oh, sweetheart, you must have misunderstood. I didn't misunderstand. I cut her off. This is about control, not support. You're not doing this for me. You're doing it for yourselves. Thomas leaned forward, his face darkening. Lydia, you're being unreasonable. Do you even understand how complicated managing an estate like this is? I understand perfectly, I said, my voice steady. And that's why I've already taken steps to protect it. You won't be getting a single penny. Karen's mask slipped, her expression twisting into anger. We are your parents. How dare you accuse us of such things? Parents don't manipulate their children, I said, standing. You don't care about me. You care about what I can give you. And I'm done letting you use me. Karen's voice rose, but I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I walked out of the house, my heart pounding. Back at home, Mason and Claire were waiting for me. I collapsed into a chair, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over me. How'd it go? Mason asked. They're furious, I admitted. Then I smiled. And I don't care. I said no. Claire hugged me tightly. That's my sister, she said. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged, not because I had earned it, but because they had always been my real family. I sat across from my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Amanda, who had been guiding me through securing my inheritance. Papers were spread out on the polished mahogany table, and her sharp eyes scanned every detail. "So with this," Amanda said, tapping a specific line on the document, "Karen and Thomas are completely barred from accessing your estate. Even if they contest it, they don't have a legal leg to stand on." Relief swept over me, but a hint of sadness lingered. I didn't think I'd need to protect myself from my own biological parents, I admitted. Amanda's expression softened. "Family isn't always about blood, Lydia. You're taking control of your future. And that's what matters." The pen felt heavier than I expected as I signed the final document. With each stroke, I felt a layer of their influence peeling away. Later that week, I made another visit to Amanda's office. Not for more legal battles, but to start a new chapter. I had decided to donate a significant portion of my inheritance to local charities. "This will go to women's shelters and educational programs," I explained to Amanda. "I want to help people who've been manipulated and left with nothing." Amanda smiled. "That's a beautiful way to turn something painful into something meaningful." Walking out of her office that day, I felt lighter. My future was my own, and I was determined to use it for good. A week later, I was at a bustling farmer's market with Mason and Claire. The air was filled with the smell of fresh produce and baked goods, and the sun warmed my shoulders as we browsed the stalls. I was laughing at one of Mason's terrible jokes when I heard Karen's voice. "Lydia." I froze, my heart sinking. Karen and Thomas were storming toward me, their expressions a mix of anger and desperation. People turned to watch as their voices rose above the market's hum. "You've betrayed us," Karen accused, her voice sharp. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Mason stepped in front of me, but I put a hand on his arm. "It's okay," I said softly, stepping forward. Karen continued. "We took you in, gave you a chance to know your real family, and you're throwing it all away." I took a deep breath, my voice calm but firm. "You didn't take me in out of love. You saw me as a means to an end. A ticket to money you didn't earn." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Karen's face turned red. "That's not true," Thomas interjected. "You're ungrateful. We're your parents. Parents don't manipulate their children into signing away their future," I said. "Parents don't abandon their child the moment they can't benefit from them anymore." I reached into my bag and pulled out copies of the documents they had tried to make me sign. Holding them up, I said, "This is proof of your intentions. You were going to take everything and leave me with nothing." Karen sputtered. "That's a lie. You forged those." "Lydia doesn't need to stoop to your level," Mason cut in. "You've been exposed, and everyone here can see the truth." Claire joined in, her voice icy. "We're her family, not you. You lost any claim to her when you decided to give her up for adoption." The crowd murmured, their sympathetic glances fueling my courage. "You tried to break me," I said, looking directly at Karen and Thomas. "But I'm done letting you control me. You have no power over me anymore." Karen's face twisted in fury. "You'll regret this." "No, I won't," I said simply, "because I've finally chosen myself." As Karen and Thomas stormed off, I felt the weight of their manipulation lift from my shoulders. Mason clapped a hand on my back. "Well, that was one for the books." Claire grinned. "You handled that like a pro." For the first time in years, I felt free. The truth was out, and I had nothing to fear. My future was mine to shape, and I wasn't looking back. I never thought a simple dinner could feel so monumental. But as I stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of sauce and listening to Mason and Claire bicker over the playlist, I realized just how far we'd come. "Lydia, I'm telling you, Claire's music taste is stuck in the early 2000s, Mason teased, leaning against the counter. Claire shot him a glare as she set the table. "And Mason thinks he's a DJ just because he owns a Bluetooth speaker." I laughed, the sound feeling lighter than it had in years. "How about we let the food steal the show tonight and keep the playlist neutral?" Mason and Claire exchanged smirks but didn't argue. That was the thing about us now. There was no underlying tension. No need to tiptoe around unspoken resentments. When the table was finally set and the aroma of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread filled the room, my parents arrived. They hugged me tightly, their warmth genuine and free of the guilt that used to cloud our interactions. "Everything smells amazing, sweetheart," Mom said, her eyes glistening with pride. "Is there anything you can't do?" Dad joked, squeezing my shoulder. I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. You all taught me everything I know. As we sat down, the atmosphere was different from any family dinner I'd experienced before. It wasn't about obligation or appearances. It was about connection. To Lydia, Mason said, raising his glass once everyone had settled. For being the bravest, smartest, most badass sister we could ask for. I felt my cheeks flush, but the warmth in his voice brought tears to my eyes. Mason, you're going to make me cry before I've even taken a bite. Claire smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You deserve every word. You stood up for yourself and reminded us all what real strength looks like. The words settled in my chest, filling the space where doubt used to live. For so long I had felt like an outsider, someone who had to prove their worth to belong. But now I knew the truth. I had always been part of this family, even when I couldn't see it. As the night went on, we shared stories, laughed until our sides hurt, and reminisced about childhood memories that felt brighter now. It wasn't about the past or the future. It was about this moment right here with the people who truly mattered. After dinner, as we lingered around the table, Mason leaned over and said, "You're stuck with us now, you know." I grinned. Good. I wouldn't want it any other way. For the first time I felt whole, no longer searching for where I belonged because I was already home. Opening day at my art gallery felt surreal. Like I was stepping into a dream I had tucked away for far too long. The walls, adorned with pieces that told stories of resilience, passion, and transformation, reflected not just the artist's journeys, but my own. The sign outside read Lydia's Canvas, a name I chose after Mason suggested it. People should know the heart behind this place, he'd said. And for once I agreed without hesitation. Claire was there early, buzzing around with her clipboard like the self-appointed event manager she was. The flowers are perfect. The lighting is perfect. And Mason hasn't broken anything yet. We might just pull this off, she said with a wink. Mason appeared moments later, carrying a tray of pastries he had insisted on baking himself. Art and snacks, what more could people want? It's beautiful, Lydia, Mom said, her voice catching as she hugged me. You've created something truly special. The gallery filled quickly with friends, artists, and even a few local critics, mingling and admiring the collection. I found myself beaming, not just because of the success, but because I finally felt like I was living authentically on my own terms. As the evening wound down, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The cool breeze was a welcome contrast to the warmth inside. Mason joined me, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. So, how does it feel to be the boss of the coolest gallery in town? I took a sip, smiling. It feels right. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And you did it all on your own, Mason said, his voice filled with admiration. You didn't let anyone's expectations or manipulations define you. I thought back to the Lydia who had once yearned for approval, who had let herself be torn apart by the weight of others' judgments. She felt like a stranger now, someone I could look at with compassion but no longer wanted to be. I think for the first time I'm really proud of myself, I admitted. Not just for this gallery but for choosing myself. For knowing I'm enough. Mason clinked his glass against mine. You've always been enough, Lydia. It just took you a little while to see it. As I stood there, surrounded by the people who truly loved and supported me, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This wasn't just the opening of an art gallery. It was the beginning of a life where I no longer doubted my worth. I didn't need validation from people who couldn't see my value. I had already found everything I needed within myself, and in the family who had always been my true home. As the last guests filtered out of the gallery, the warm hum of laughter and conversation lingered in the air. I stood by the entrance, soaking it all in, the art, the smiles, the support. It felt like my life had finally clicked into place. All right, close your eyes. Mason's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to see him and Claire grinning like conspirators, their hands behind their backs. What are you 2 up to now? I asked, half laughing. Just trust us, Claire said, nudging me playfully. I sighed but obeyed, shutting my eyes. I felt something placed in my hands, thick and a little heavy. Okay, open them. I opened my eyes to see a large, beautifully decorated scrapbook. On the cover, in Mason's uneven scrawl, were the words, Our Lydia, always and forever. My breath caught as I traced the cover with my fingers. What is this? Memories, Claire said softly. We all put it together. We wanted you to see how much you've always meant to us. I opened the first page and there it was, a baby photo of me, my adoptive mom cradling me in her arms. First day we brought you home, Claire said, pointing to the picture. Each page was filled with snapshots of my life. Holidays, school plays, family vacations. Little notes and captions were scribbled beside the photos. Mason's Lydia's epic cupcake fail. Age 10 made me laugh. When I reached a photo of me at my high school art show, my eyes stung with tears. You saved this, I whispered. Claire put an arm around me. Of course we did. We've always been proud of you, even when you couldn't see it yourself. By the time I reached the last page, I was a blubbering mess. The final photo was from tonight, a candid shot of me laughing with Mason and Claire. Beneath it, in bold letters, they'd written, Lydia, you'll always be one of us. I looked up at them, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say, this is perfect. You don't have to say anything, Mason said, pulling me into a hug. Just remember, no matter what happens, you're stuck with us. Claire joined in, wrapping her arms around both of us. Family forever, she said. I let myself sink into the moment, feeling the love that I once doubted was mine to claim. It wasn't perfect. We weren't perfect. But it was real. And it was enough. As we pulled apart, Mason grinned. Now, can we go celebrate with some cake? Because I'm starving. Laughing, I nodded. Cake sounds perfect. As we stood together, the three of us against the world, I knew one thing for certain. I was exactly where I was meant to be. Ready to face the future, surrounded by the family who had always been my true home.